Okay, hello everyone, and welcome back to the Bible for Everyone podcast. My name is Tim, and in this show, all we do is read the Bible and talk about it. Um, and as the from the perspective that we're all searching for answers together, because I'm quite new to the Bible myself. In fact, I've only completely read through I've read all of Matthew, I've read all of Mark, I've read all of Esther before, but other than that, I've just sampled different areas of the Bible. So really, in this show, it's my first time going through the whole Bible as well. And there's many books to go through, and on this show, we've gone through all of Mark and half of Esther. But someday I'd love to have all the books of the canon, where each one will have a playlist of reading through the whole book and just talking about it. So we're now in the second half of Esther, and where we left off was Haman plotting to not only kill Mordecai, but kill all of the Jewish people in Persia. And so I'll continue into chapter 6. And if you didn't watch the first episode of Esther, go back and watch Esther chapter 1 through 5, and then pick up with me here in chapter 6. That same night, the king could not get to sleep, so he had the official records of the empire brought and read to him. The part they read included the account of how Mordecai had uncovered a plot to assassinate the king. The plot made by Bigthana and Teresh, the two palace servants who had guarded the king's rooms. The king asked, "How have we honored and rewarded Mordecai for this?" His servants answered, "Nothing has been done for him." "Are any of my officials in the palace?" the king asked. Now Haman had just entered the courtyard. He had come to ask the king to have Mordecai killed. So the servants answered, "Haman is here, waiting to see you." "Show him in," said the king. So Haman came in, and the king said to him, "There is someone I wish very much to honor. What should I do for this man?" Haman thought to himself, "Now who could the king want to honor so much? Me, of course." So he answered the king, "Have royal robes brought for this man, robes that you yourself wear. Have a royal ornament put on your own horse. Then have your highest noblemen dress the man in these robes and lead him mounted on the horse through the city square. Have the noblemen announce as they go, 'See how the king rewards someone he wishes to honor.'" Then the king said to Haman, "Hurry and get the robes and the horse, and provide these honors for Mordecai the Jew. Do everything for him that you have suggested. You will find him sitting at the entrance of the palace." So Haman got the robes and the horse, and he put the robes on Mordecai. Mordecai got on the horse, and Haman led him through the city square, announcing to the people as they went, "See how the king rewards a man he wishes to honor." Mordecai then went back to the palace entrance, while Haman hurried home, covering his face in embarrassment. He told his wife and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Then she and those wise friends of his told him, You are beginning to lose power to Mordecai. He is a Jew, and you cannot overcome him. He will certainly defeat you." While they were still talking, the palace servants arrived in a hurry to take Haman to Esther's banquet. So, isn't that ironic that Haman, planning on killing Mordecai and convincing the king that Mordecai was to be killed, he ended up having to honor him in this way by leading him in the city square on a horse, the way that he felt he deserved to be honored. So I think that's an example of God kind of giving Haman like a taste of his own hubris, kind of. Like Haman is so prideful, so hateful, and God keeps thwarting his plans, and eventually, well, as we'll see, he does defeat Haman's plan to do this horrible thing to the Jewish people of Persia. So let's keep reading into chapter 7. And so the king and Haman went to eat with Esther for a second time. Over the wine, the king asked her again, "Now, Queen Esther, what do you want? Tell me, and you shall have it. I'll even give you half the empire." Queen Esther answered, "If it please your majesty to grant my humble request, my wish is that I may live and that my people may live. My people and I have been sold for slaughter. If it were nothing more serious than being sold into slavery, I would have kept quiet and not bothered you about it. But we are about to be destroyed, exterminated." Then King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, "Who dares to do such a thing? Where is this man?" Esther answered, "Our enemy, our persecutor, is the evil man Haman." So this is the first time Esther is revealing that she's Jewish, and that was a very brave thing to do because in this time, in this empire, there was a lot of hatred for the Jewish people. It looks like definitely on the part of Haman and others too, because Haman was able to convince the king of this decree to carry out this evil plot. And here, Esther has the courage and the bravery to call Haman out right at the table in front of him. And this is the second banquet. So remember, at the first banquet, Esther still was sitting there with the enemy Haman, and she was able to hold her cards close to herself and not reveal right away. But she had to wait until the second banquet, and so you can see she's very courageous as well as strategic. So let's keep reading. Haman faced the king and queen with terror. The king got up in a fury, left the room, and went outside to the palace garden. Haman could see that the king was determined to punish him for this, so he stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. He had just thrown himself down on Esther's couch to beg for mercy, when the king came back into the room from the gardens. Seeing this, the king cried out, The king had no sooner said this than the servants covered Haman's head. Then one of them, who was named Harbona, said, "Haman even went so far to plan to kill Mordecai, who saved your majesty's life." "Kill Haman," the king commanded. So Haman was killed. Then the king's anger cooled down. That same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther all the property of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. Esther told the king that Mordecai was related to her, and from then on, Mordecai was allowed to enter the king's presence. The king took off his ring with the seal on it and gave it to Mordecai. Esther put Mordecai in charge of Haman's property. Then Esther spoke to the king again, throwing herself at his feet and crying. She begged him to do something to stop the evil plot that Haman, the descendant of Agag, had made against the Jews. So at this point, Haman is dead, but his plot and all his minions are still alive and are still a great threat to the Jewish people. The king held out the gold scepter to her, so she stood up and said, "If it please your majesty, and if you care about me, and if it seems right to you, please issue a proclamation to keep Haman's orders from being carried out. Those orders that the son of Hamatha, the descendant of Agag, gave for the destruction of all the Jews in the empire. How can I endure it if this disaster comes on my people and my own relatives are killed?" King Xerxes then said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, "Look, I have killed Haman for his plot against the Jews, and have given Esther his property. But a proclamation issued in the king's name and stamped with the royal seal cannot be revoked. You may, however, write to the Jews whatever you like, and you may write it in my name and stamp it with the royal seal." So you can see kind of the ancient Near East mindset of once Xerxes made the proclamation, he can't undo it. But what he's going to say is that the Jewish people can defend themselves. So let's keep reading. This happened on the 23rd day of the third month, the month of Sivan. Mordecai called the king's secretaries and dictated letters to the Jews and to the governors, administrators, and officials of all the 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. The letters were written to each province in its own language and system of writing, and to the Jews in their language and system of writing. Mordecai had the letters written in the name of King Xerxes, and he stamped them with the royal seal. They were delivered by riders mounted on fast horses from the royal stables. These letters explained that the king would allow the Jews in every city to organize for self-defense. If armed men of any nationality in any province attacked the Jewish men, their children, or their women, the Jews could fight back and destroy the attackers. This decree was to take effect throughout the Persian Empire on the day set for the Haman's evil plan, the 13th of Adar, in the 12th month. It was to be proclaimed as law and made known to everyone in every province, so that the Jews would be ready to take revenge on their enemies when that day came. At the king's command, the riders mounted royal horses and rode off at top speed. The decree was also made public in Susa, the capital city. Mordecai left the palace wearing royal robes of blue and white, a cloak of fine purple linen, and a magnificent golden crown. Then the streets of Susa rang with cheers and joyful shouts. For the Jews there was joy and relief, happiness and a sense of victory. In every city and province, wherever the king's proclamation was read, the Jews held a joyful holiday with feasting and happiness. In fact, many other people became Jews because they were afraid of them now. Okay, I'm still going here. So, you can see this. There's Mordecai on the horse, and there's a bunch of people reading the decree saying that the Jewish people are allowed to defend themselves against the people that are trying to kill them. So, chapter 9 comes on next. The 13th day of Adar came, the day on which the royal proclamation was to take effect, the day when the enemies of the Jewish people were hoping to get them in their power, but instead the Jews triumphed over them. In the Jewish quarter of every city in the empire of the Jews organized to attack anyone who tried to harm them. People everywhere were afraid of them, and no one could stand against them. In fact, all the provincial officials, governors, administrators, and royal representatives helped the Jewish people because they were all afraid of Mordecai. It was well known throughout the empire that Mordecai was now a powerful man in the palace and was growing more powerful. So the Jews could do what they wanted with their enemies. They attacked them with swords and killed them. In Susa, the capital city itself, the Jews killed 500 people. Among them were the 10 sons of Haman. However, there was no looting. That same day, the number of people killed in Susa was reported to the king. He then said to Queen Esther, "In Susa alone, the Jews have killed 500 people, including Haman's sons. What must they have done in the provinces? What do you want now? You shall have it. Tell me what else you want, and you shall have it." Esther answered, "If it please your majesty, let the Jews in Susa do again tomorrow what they have allowed to do today." The king ordered this to be done, and the proclamation was issued in Susa. On the 14th day of Adar, the Jews of Susa got together and killed 300 more people in the city, but again they did no looting. So that's kind of an that's kind of extreme. But the Jews in the provinces also organized and defended themselves. They rid themselves of their enemies by killing 75,000 people who hated them, but they did no looting. This was on the 13th day of Adar. On the next day, the 14th, there were no more killing, and they made it a joyful day of feasting. The Jews of Susa, however, made the 15th day a holiday, since they had killed their enemies on the 13th and the 14th, and then stopped on the 15th. This is why Jews who live in small towns observe the 14th day of the month of Adar as a joyous holiday, a time for feasting and giving gifts of food to one another. Mordecai had these events written down and sent letters to all the Jews, near and far, throughout the Persian Empire, telling them to observe the 14th and 15th days of Adar as holidays every year. These were the days on which the Jews had rid themselves of their enemies. This was a month that had been turned from a time of grief and despair into a time of joy and happiness. They were told to observe these days with feasts and parties, giving gifts of food to one another and to the poor. So the Jews followed Mordecai's instructions, and the celebration became an annual custom. Haman and the enemy of the Jewish people had cast lots, which today would call like rolling dice, which is why I have a pair of dice on the thumbnail, to determine the day for destroying the Jews. But he had planned to wipe them out. But Esther went to the king, and the king issued written orders with the result that Haman suffered the fate he had planned for the Jews. That is why the holidays are called Purim, because of Mordecai's letter and because of all that had happened to them. The Jews made it a rule for themselves, their descendants, and anyone who might become a Jew, that at the proper time each year these 2 days would be regularly observed according to Mordecai's instructions. It was resolved that every Jewish family of every future generation in every province and every city should be remembered and observe the days of Purim for all the times to come. Then Queen Esther, the daughter of Abihail, along with Mordecai, also wrote a letter putting her full authority behind the letter about Purim, which Mordecai had written earlier. The letter was addressed to all the Jews, and copies were sent to all the 127 provinces of the Persian Empire. It wished the Jews peace and security and directed them and their descendants to observe the days of Purim at the proper time, just as they had adopted rules for the observance of feasts and times of mourning. This was commanded by both Mordecai and Queen Esther. Esther's command confirming the rules for Purim was written down on a scroll. Chapter 10. King Xerxes imposed forced labor on the people of the coastal regions of his empire as well as on those of the interior. All the great and wonderful things he did, as well as the whole story of how he promoted Mordecai to high office, are recorded in the official records of the kings of Persia and Media. Mordecai the Jew was ranked second in rank only to King Xerxes himself. He was honored and well liked by his fellow Jews. He worked for the good of his people and for the security of all their descendants. Okay, that's it. So, we finished the book of Esther. And it's a good story of how God makes many different coincidences. What looked like coincidences to us are actually part of God's sovereignty. Because had Mordecai been able to carry out his plans and killed all the Jewish people in the world at that time, like this was before Jesus, so it would be maybe like 3,000 years ago. But he was going to kill all the Jewish people from Ethiopia all the way up to India. And that was basically the whole world. Of course, there were people in other places, but that was the whole Jewish world. So then Jesus never would have been born without Esther's courage and bravery to defeat Haman. And then it's, if you're not used to reading about war and how brutal things could be in the biblical times, some of the language can sound really extreme and harsh. But that is kind of how the world was like that. The world was a lot more brutal. And it is still brutal today, but sort of in different ways, I guess. But don't let the violence in the Bible ruin the story for you, because God doesn't endorse violence. God actually is a God of peace and truth. So there's people say this a lot, is that the Bible is very descriptive. It's not always prescriptive. So if the Bible is describing some horrible thing in the world, it's not prescribing that thing. It's just describing what happened. So keep that in mind as you read, especially when you go into some of these Old Testament stories. Yeah, but unfortunately, we didn't really get many people popping in, but hopefully a couple dozen people will watch the recorded section. And so I'll end the stream there. Thanks for listening.